President Trump is once again escalating his threats against Iran as the human and economic toll of the war rises. This morning, President Trump attending the dignified transfer of 4 U.S. service members killed in the Middle East over the weekend. President Trump, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Kane, can be seen saluting as the bodies of the fallen were transported off the plane. President Trump speaking to reporters ahead of this incredibly solemn event, suggesting the fallen soldiers all supported the war.
They are indeed great heroes, actually. They said, and all of them said very strongly, we cannot let Iran have a nuclear weapon. They won't have a nuclear weapon. So we're going to honor them. And one of the hardest things to do. For me, it's one of the hardest things to do as a president. But has to be done.
Just hours before that, the president issuing a new threat on social media, warning Tehran that every time it shoots at a ship in the Strait of Hormuz, the U.S. will bomb and destroy one bridge or power plant in Iran. The U.S. has now launched strikes on Iran for 11 consecutive days, despite the administration saying Iran's military capabilities have been eviscerated and the war is over. President Trump today insisting public support is on his side.
Well, Americans aren't against the war. A poll just came out. Americans don't want high gasoline prices, but they're not against the war.
And yet every major reputable poll shows the war is unpopular with the public. Meanwhile, the administration's strategy in Iran remains unclear, including what it would take to de-escalate and get the U.S. and Iran back to the negotiating table. Secretary of State Marco Rubio was pressed on that point today. Take a listen.
Is the U.S. strategy to strike Iran into submission? And why do you think Iran is not giving in right now?
Well, look, the United States is, Iran's in a lot of trouble. Ships are trying to go through the straits and they're getting blown up. Commercial ships are going through the straits and they're being blown up. The United States is defending that shipping and in addition is targeting the places that are launching against those ships to continue to degrade Iran's ability to target and harm global shipping. We remain open to diplomacy. We remain open to working it out in a negotiated way. But right now, they don't seem to be serious about that. And so we're going to continue to protect shipping.
Now, here at home, fuel prices continue to rise with the average cost of gas above $4 a gallon and oil prices picking back up, closing today around $87 a barrel. Joining me now is NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba. NBC News senior national security correspondent Courtney Kube, who is at Dover Air Force Base for that dignified transfer, and NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Julie Tsirkin. Thanks to all of you for starting us off. Monica, let me start with you at the White House. We are hearing this new threat that I just talked about from President Trump. So take me inside your conversations. What is the administration, what are officials there saying the strategy is to get Iran back to the negotiating table?
Well, so often, Kristen, throughout the course of this military conflict, we have seen examples of the president really using his social media platform as a way to sort of try out these threats from a rhetoric perspective, escalating that kind of language without necessarily following through. We have seen that as a sort of pressure tactic that the administration has used. But of course, this does raise the question about whether this is something they would actually go through with. And given those comments you just played from Secretary Rubio and from the president himself, they are still talking about this potential path to diplomacy. But I have to tell you that every time they've been bringing that up recently, it doesn't seem like there's anything that's actually moving the ball forward on that. In fact, this really feels like the administration continues to be stuck in a place where it's still figuring out what might get Iran back to the negotiating table when Iran doesn't seem to have any appetite or urgency to do so, Kristen.
No, you're absolutely right about that, Monica. And when you see those images at Dover Air Force Base today, few images are as powerful, potent as a dignified transfer, an incredibly solemn event. President Trump there, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, as we were just discussing. How is the White House, how's the president dealing with the human toll of this war, Monica?
Yeah, the weight of this responsibility is perhaps never more clear than on a day like today for the president and his administration, when they are there physically to meet with the families who did agree to have media coverage of this dignified transfer today. And this is a president who participated in several of these transfers in his first administration. This is his second dignified transfer this year so far. And there was a moment in which he acknowledged one of the families happened to be from Georgia, and when the president let them know that he was going to be headed there after he attended this dignified transfer for a political event, he says, according to the White House, that he offered them a ride aboard Air Force One, and the family members took him up on that, traveled with him down to Georgia, and even attended this rally that you're playing there on your screen right now, where the president again acknowledged them, thank them for their contribution, and of course for the fallen service members' heroic efforts in this prolonged conflict right now in the Middle East. So that certainly does weigh on this administration and on the president, who acknowledged all 4 service members today as heroes. Kristen.
Just an extraordinary detail there, Monica, and we are monitoring what President Trump is saying in Georgia. We will, of course, bring any newsworthy comments to everyone who is watching right now as we get them. But Monica, let me ask you about the midterms, obviously looming very large over all of this. President Trump was asked yesterday how it's factoring into his thinking, and he really downplayed any impact, right?
He's been pretty dismissive of that notion overall. Remember, a few weeks back, he, of course, really made headlines when he said that he didn't think about Americans' personal financial situations when making decisions about Iran. But he's seemingly making a similar statement this week and saying that, yeah, he may not be the one who's on the ballot in November, but certainly Republicans who are worried about this issue being a problem for the GOP and for holding the House are worried about what kind of factor it may play. Kristen.
All right, Monica Alba, starting us off on an incredibly somber day at the White House. Monica, thank you so much for that reporting. Courtney, Kube, let me turn to you. You are at Dover Air Force Base, where that dignified transfer took place. What can you tell us about these service members who were transferred today?
Yeah, sorry, we're out in front of Dover Air Force Base now. It's a little bit loud here, but I can tell you that that was not the case inside the dignified transfer today. It's a very quiet and solemn ceremony. We saw 7 U.S. Army soldiers go into that C-17 and one by one carry out the flag-draped transfer cases of those 4 fallen U.S. Army soldiers. You know, Kristen, a lot of our viewers may not realize this, but when you go to a dignified transfer event like the one today, the military is very particular about the rules for media and anyone attending. As reporters, we're not allowed to get any audio on the video showing the event, and that is in large part to protect the family members who are there. But I can tell you, I was standing not too far from some of those family members, and it's just gut-wrenching to listen to them when they see the transfer case come off with that flag on it. It's the first time that their loved one is back in the United States after giving that ultimate sacrifice, and it's the first time that they are seeing them back here in the United States after learning the horrible news that they've been killed. It was 4 Americans, 3 killed in Jordan, 1 in Iraq, and one of those individuals, a sergeant who was injured and missing initially in Jordan, is still waiting to be positively identified by the DNA testing here at Dover, Kristen.
You're right, Courtney. The images are just so incredibly powerful and hard to watch, quite frankly. The president, of course, today, as we're talking about, threatened to strike bridges, power plants in Iran. Does the military have the legal authority to strike those targets? What are your sources telling you there?
Yeah, so it wouldn't be the first time that the military has struck infrastructure during the course of this war with Iran. And basically the way that they can make these legal strikes is by finding locations that would be considered dual use. So potentially a bridge or a facility where the military, the Iranian military or the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, uses that location in support of their military efforts. So, for instance, if there's a bridge where the IRGC is moving equipment or logistics or supplies or personnel, whatever it is, in support of attacking commercial shipping in the Strait of Hormuz, that could be considered a legal and legitimate military target. So the question is, are those the sorts of things that President Trump is talking about here? We've been watching to see. There has been pretty consistent activity in the Strait of Hormuz, in and around, but so far we don't have any reports of any activity since he posted that Truth Social earlier today, Kristen.
Courtney Kube with your reporting from Dover Air Force Base on an incredibly somber day. Courtney, thank you so much for joining us, for giving us that viewpoint. We appreciate it. Julie, let me turn to you. The war escalating, obviously, as we said at the top of the show. We know that Democrats have been critical of the president from the start, arguing that he's acting outside of his authority, given that he hasn't gotten congressional approval. What are you hearing from Republican lawmakers? Are they starting to lose patience with the fact that this war is now dragging on?
Kristen, privately, they have been questioning and testing their patience all throughout this war, but it does not seem like the unfortunate addition of more service members to the count of the service members that we've lost, now 17 since the start of the war, Kristen. It does not seem like that is adding any momentum, at least publicly, for Republicans to say, you know what, now is the time where we challenge the president's authority on this war. Look no further than the dichotomy we're seeing right now with that supplemental package, $95 billion of additional funding the administration says it needs to not only continue its fighting in Iran, but also replenish some of the munitions, the stockpiles that they've been using over the course of the 5 months. Democrats that I've talked to, Kristen, say we would be open to looking at that, but the problem is they would like Republicans and the administration to at least give them a vote, a say as to whether the administration has unilateral powers into continuing this, and yet Republicans find it easier to move that kind of supplemental package with only Republican votes than working across the aisle. So far to say, Kristen, that Republicans are not looking to push the administration any further than they have been, which hasn't been much over the course of the last 5 months.
Well, Democrats are expected to force another war powers vote this week. How do you expect that all to play out, Julie? What are you going to be watching for there?
Yeah, Kristen, they could vote as soon as tomorrow before they leave town for the week. Democrats once again trying to put Republicans on notice, particularly in the Senate. We've seen this effort succeed in the past, right? Not through that veto-proof majority, not that two-thirds majority that is needed. But certainly there has been some disgruntling on the Republican side. Kristen, I have to tell you, though, more than those 4 Republicans that we have been seeing, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, Bill Cassidy, Rand Paul, for budgetary and war reasons. Of course, he's different than the other Republicans. I don't expect more Republican votes to join Democrats in that war powers vote, despite the fact that they've heard from Pete Hegseth this week. They've questioned him. Privately, a number of Republicans that I've spoken to, Kristen, want the administration to tell them their plan. But I think a part of this, too, is that Republicans feel comfortable having Democrats push the administration, asking the tough questions, while for now, even in the words of Leader John Thune yesterday, as recently as yesterday, Kristen, they are allowing the administration to continue to have latitude. How long they continue their patience for, that remains to be seen.
All right, Julie Tsirkin, with all of your reporting from Capitol Hill. Julie, thank you so very much. We appreciate it. As President Trump continues to defend his military action as a way to stop Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon, NBC News is learning the Trump administration is set to approve a landmark nuclear deal with one of Tehran's Gulf rivals, Saudi Arabia. Now, according to a senior administration official, the U.S. will support the creation of a civilian nuclear power program in Saudi, which could pave the way for Riyadh to pursue uranium enrichment. Asked about the expected agreement and concerns about nuclear proliferation, Secretary of State Marco Rubio said the administration would be seeking congressional approval for the deal. Look.
We have to do it with Congress anyways, so we'll certainly do it publicly. But suffice it to say, the U.S. is not going to reach any agreement with any country in the world that leads to the risk of proliferation.
And joining me now is NBC News intelligence reporter Dan Luce. Dan, thanks so much for being here. Appreciate it. So break down what you know so far, what your reporting is about this deal.
So at this point, they haven't briefed in detail, but yes, this is a plan to allow Saudi Arabia to develop a civilian nuclear energy program with U.S. help. Now, it is not adhering to what's called the gold standard at this point. There's no word that Saudi Arabia has agreed to sort of extensive UN inspections. that would allow inspectors to look anywhere, anytime. And they've always been opposed to that. And that's called the gold standard, as I said. And it also would have banned uranium enrichment. There's no word that that's banned. And that's pretty interesting, because you just showed Secretary of State Rubio talking. Well, when he was a senator back in the first Trump administration, he was very outspoken about any nuclear cooperation agreement with Saudi Arabia that didn't meet that standard. So here's what he had to say at that point. Oh, sorry. You can read what he said. And he basically said, no way should there be any cooperation agreement without that standard.
And I'll read what he said. He said the United States should suspend all talks related to a civil nuclear cooperation agreement with Saudi Arabia until the Saudi government agrees to, as you just said, the gold standard requirements and proves they are willing to be responsible partners that respect the basic rights of their citizens. Again, this was Senator Marco Rubio back in 2018. And Dan, to this point, Saudi Arabia is basically saying, well, if Iran moves to develop a nuclear weapon, then we'll have to move to develop a nuclear weapon. I mean, how might this impact the stability in the region there?
So the administration will say this allows the U.S. to shape the program and not have Russia or China get involved. But critics and some lawmakers are saying this could open the door for Saudi Arabia to eventually have the know-how and to have a nuclear weapons capability. So it's a very controversial move, and one that Israel will have real reservations about, too.
I mean, the Biden administration was considering a similar deal as well. Is the Trump administration effectively giving up some of its potential leverage?
I think they lost some leverage here. I think that Saudi Arabia was not ready to recognize Israel, given the war in Gaza and now this current war with Iran, which they have a lot of reservations about as well. So I think it's an admission, really. The White House could not get that out of the Saudis.
What is the White House? What is the United States getting from this deal? What's the argument in favor of it?
I think the White House will probably argue this is a boon to industry. They want to have these agreements all over the world. And so U.S. nuclear energy industry will benefit, and we'll have all these agreements all over the world. And I think the other argument they will probably make is that, would you rather have Russia doing this? Would you rather have China building enrichment facilities and so on? So I think that's the argument they'll make. And then they're going to face tough questions about what restrictions, what limits are going to be placed on the Saudis.
And again, Secretary Rubio is stressing it will require congressional approval ultimately.
Yes, although 2/3 vote to override a presidential veto on this one.
All right, Dan Luce, thank you so much. Great to see you. Appreciate all the really great information.
We thank you for watching. And remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.